Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I will present my take on the significance and impact of ethical and sustainable business practices using the example of two nations, namely the United Kingdom and India. Now, talking about the first part of the introduction, what are industrialization and globalization? In layman's terms, industrialization refers to the collective drive of internal and external stakeholders toward the creation of industries in different fields of customer needs and interests. This idea traveled around the globe through globalization. Now, you may ask, what is globalization? It was never really invented, but theorized as a practice of trading economic valuables, information, and knowledge between individuals, corporates, and governments across the globe. This was theorized by late Peter Sutherland, a former Irish Attorney General and also dubbed as the father of globalization in the late 1800s. Now, talking about the second part of the introduction, the significance and justification of the need for ethical and sustainable business practices, we must understand that the pros of these obscene economic growth, the social costs of these actions grew even larger. This is where the evolving culture of ethical and sustainable business practices plays a substantial role. As growth spearheaded across Europe, local communities began enjoying several benefits from the positive externalities caused by industrialization, which is income, employment. However, with benefits, economic growth also resulted in a plethora of negative externalities across the globe. To tackle such externalities and malicious business practices on a macro level that was happening, nations collectively were motivated to develop various codes of conduct and sustainable ideologies to set a collective standard of work practice that morally and ethically abide by the social cultural norms in that geographical location. Thus, with respect to the knowledge shared, this report will be analyzed through a comparison of the impact of industrialization and globalization on two distinct known nations, the United Kingdom and India, and the comparison will also highlight how growth achieved in these economic stages led to the creation of ethical and sustainable business practices and norms in different cultural and societal conditions. Now, talking about how industrialization spread across, the graph that you observe traces how nations globally recognize the rising requirement for basic needs and commodities due to growing populations, which demanded mass production mechanisms and industries in place. The diagram shows that Great Britain had one of the most rapid growths in GDP per capita between 1600s and 2000s, which reflected the accelerating industrial and economic growth in the nation. Many other Western Europe and Latin American nations followed a similar trend. However, as industrialization and urbanization spread across the nations, it took its toll on the environmental and health standards of the society. With the growth in the density of factories and manufacturing units, the quality of soil degraded quadruply, adding excess nutrients and chemicals to food substances. Now, talking about the environmental impact of industrialization, the diagram that you see now showcases how different environmental factors were impacted due to the abnormal growth in industrialization and modern mass production techniques practiced in the pre-Brexit European region. The pie charts given above iterates that the economic losses and fatalities caused by the EU, three-fourths of them losses were caused by man-made circumstances such as ill business practices in hydrological areas, untreated gases from factories, and now dumping waste in ecological areas. Now, moving on to the fatalities caused due to the environmental factors, it can be observed that 91% of the fatalities arose due to heat waves and the climate shifts, which made livelihood difficult in certain parts of UK and EU. Now, taking our perspective of environmental impact of industrialization to another side of the globe, we must talk about the Asian countries which began adopting industrialization and mass production techniques such as steam-powered and fuel-powered engines in the late 1900s when the British colonization introduced steam and fuel-powered engines to process raw materials in countries such as India, Vietnam, Singapore, as iterated above. Now, these developments not only brought employment but also continued providing economic prosperity post the British rule. However, with developments, these practices also created costs for the environment in around. The graph that you observe portrays India, which is a developing country that adopted the practices of industrialization quite swiftly post independence in 1947. As per the data above, As Asian countries stated in 1900s, the contamination spread was observed in the 1977 to 2009 when the number of monitoring stations multiplied quadruply as shown in the graph above of India. This implies how the trend of increasing soil erosion and eutrophication due to the industrialization in certain regions making them developing countries. Following the economically benefiting practiced uses in developed countries such as UK, such practices have contributed to increased global warming in India, not only about climate change and also through enhanced greenhouse effect. The Nuremberg Code, the first code of ethics ever written, was performed in 1948. The Nuremberg Code, which primarily suggested an ethically and morally improved set of medical practices, considered the new normal in the medical industry. Practices that increase chances of success can reduce negative spillover effects, infection due to unhygienic utensils, and a lack of biohazardous waste treatment that was not present at that point of time. Now, with further developments in the knowledge pool of ethics and sustainability, codes of ethics developed and branched into three model ethical codes of conduct, showcased below. Let's observe how the legislative ideologies backing the ethical and sustainable practices in these two countries, selected India and the UK, differentiate in terms of these three codes of ethics. First, the compliance-based codes, often applied by governmental organizations which state a set of practices that must be performed in public to promote moral responsibility, tagged with a penalty for defiance. Now, let's start with India, discussing these elements which be constitutional such as Prevention of Corruption Act 1988, which rules it officially unlawful to practice corrupt methods of business, such as bribery and nepotism. Then we also see the Right to Information Act, which was done in 2005, which provides the right to information to all consumers and stakeholders in transactions with the business or also not in business in their normal lives. Now, talking about UK, we must focus on constitutions such as UK Bribery Act 2010. This act particularly lists all the practices that could be distinguished as bribery and penalties in all such acts, not only in business transactions but also in your personal life. The second one could be the Consumer Rights Act 2015, which allows consumers to have a clear picture of the product bought and the agreement with the producer made. Now, when we compare the laws of these two countries, we could see that both UK and India focuses on strengthening similar compliance values. It could also root down from their culture as British once had a stay on their corporate stand. The ideology of corruption, bribery, and unethical business practices seems to be much more described and relates very closely to modern scenarios in UK compared to the India's Prevention of Corruption Act, which was made in 1988. As constituted very early in time, it has not been updated since then. UK has very descriptive legislatures for different parts of corruption, such as bribery, modern slavery, which implies that the nation's continuous drive towards promoting ethical behavior at the societal level. Now, when we talk about the value-based codes, we could see that it promotes self-hygiene and self-development, which is aimed to grow ethical and moral values at an individual level. Now, in these days, when you see that logo right there, we can understand that the countries have adopted SDG goals and have successfully introduced processes which achieve to commitments made in regards to climate change and encouraging sustainability. Now, what is Sustainable Development Goals? It is that both countries have committed to achieving a total of 17 SDG goals such as life and waste and water treatment provided by the United Nations as a collective effort towards deteriorating environment and climate. Now, when we talk about India and UK, we should start with discussing the policies and practices that were introduced in India first. Domestic industries specializing in the manufacturing sector have made recycling a mandatory practice to improve resource allocation. Giants such as Tata and ITC have incorporated CSR as a part of their supply chain. For example, ITC employs farmers to generate raw materials for their direct food products. In 2014, India also began a Swachh Bharat mission, which focused on encouraging personal and corporate practices promoting environmental positivity. Talking about the UK, companies in the UK such as PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and other MNCs that operates in the UK, they are mandated to follow a strict SDG framework. A few examples of these SDG framework could be building trust in the society and creating a team specifically to handle climate and environmental devastations that were caused by the organization. For example, PwC has a team called S&CC, which is Sustainability and Climate Change Team. Now, talking about the third type of codes of conduct, which is the professional code, outlines the specific sustainable and ethical business practices based on the culture and environment in the organization's place of work. Such set standards are implemented according to the specialization of different professional groups. India employs a constitution such as the Companies Act 2013, which mandates every organization to allocate certain responsibilities or expenditures or corporate in CSR, which is the corporate social responsibility. This act aims to align companies with being socially benefited by carrying out safe and secure business practices. Now, in UK, they follow a certain professional code such as the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. This law specifically deal with all the unethical businesses practices that can occur internally in organization. Evaluation. India tends to have a holistic approach towards settling the laws that are to be followed to support the ethical code of conduct and the sustainability targets of the nation. UK has specifically deviated from each and every unethical practice and has specifically constructed laws to increase reliability in what's right to work and what's not. Now, takeaways. What are we taking away? Before delving into the recommendations, we must understand that even after all the policies that are in place, companies in both countries practice certain resource processing and management methods which violate not only the ethical code of conduct of the nation but also the sustainability regulations. In India, we can discuss certain examples that are practiced by Nestle in their infant formula, which was used to violate certain consumer laws through falsifying product details against, which is also against the Right of Information Act 2005, and it also impacted the pregnant women's health during labor. This has violated SDG 3, the health and well-being. Now, coming to the next scandal, which is the Maggie scandal, where the organization went against the Company Act 1986 alongside Consumer Rights 2005, which was introducing injurious raw materials in the consumables. Now, talking about United Kingdom, there was a case in 2015 where Volkswagen introduced certain emissions which was not right. This case was called Emission Gate and the Dieselgate case. The organization was proven to have manipulated data to pass emission tests on their vehicles. This violated not only the Consumer Rights Act of 2015 but also UK bribery 2010, which had been practiced. Now, companies in UK also practice a certain business certain in developing regions in the globe, such as dumping. This is a technique used by Western car manufacturers to sell unsold and outdated vehicles in developing nations to earn a surplus. Now, I'd like to give a few recommendations to understanding how to improve such standards to prevent these practices. UK government must reduce taxes on renewable resources, which acts on a halt for many locally grown businesses to attain sustainability. When you talk about resources, it's important for a business to use them and make business. And when they are halted, they can't be really used for their improvement. Such can also discourage businesses to, work with the laws and regulations made by the government. Now, also, both countries must strengthen their corruption laws and improve monitoring and inspection at larger levels to prevent large multinationals to bypass domestic laws in regard to ethics and sustainable business practices. This is because businesses which work at a greater level have more connections and network in the industry, which give them an easy upper hand into the market, which needs to be stopped. to make sure that these regulations are maintained properly. Now, coming to the end of this report, it has been understood how societal values and domestic culture plays a vital role in determining the nation's drive towards the elements of ethics and sustainability, which covers learning outcome too. When evaluating the efficacies of ethical and sustainable policies set in place by the nations, India and the United Kingdom, it can be found that the larger PLC organizations have a natural tendency towards finding loopholes in the laws through unlawful means. However, post the SDG targets to which the countries have committed, it has been implemented as a catalyst to empower every organization to make ethical practices and sustainability an integral part of their organization, allowing a contemporary organization to implement ethical and sustainable business practices in their supply chain. This achieves learning outcome 1, and that would end my presentation. Thank you.